Good morning. Would you turn with me, please, in your Old Testament to Psalm 131? Psalm 131. I was telling Laurie earlier this week, I don't believe I have ever discussed Psalm 131 just by itself. It's one of the shortest psalms in the text. It is 3 verses. It is extremely simple, kind of straight to the point. We've referred to it a time or two over the years, but I don't think we've ever just talked about it. And so we'll do that this morning. We'll just spend our time in Psalm 131. Since we don't have a great big crowd due to the weather and all of that, we'll have some opportunity for discussion. We'll kind of deal with it like a Bible class. So if you have something you want to say about it, then feel free to get my attention and we'll just go at it that way. Let's read it first. Psalm 131. It is a psalm of David, and he says, O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty, nor do I involve myself in great matters or in things too difficult for me. Surely I have composed and quieted my spirit, like a weaned child rests against his mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever. 3 short verses. We'll look at it just from the standpoint of the obvious that's there, get some lessons out of that, and then we'll be finished. The first thing is he begins by saying, my heart is not proud. A lot of times when we talk about being proud and being humble, one of the things we say is the moment that you call yourself humble, you're what? You're proud of it, and therefore you're no longer humble. And so you're kind of in that situation where if I acknowledge that I am, then probably I am not, and that's not exactly what he's talking about. In fact, you need to really see this psalm as a psalm between David and God. It is not David saying, look at me and how well I have done. It is David saying, this is the kind of person I am determined to be. This is who I want to be. I'm sure you've noticed over the years, but in a lot of the preaching that we do here at Northside, we state the ideal as if it is what we're always doing. We try to do that whenever possible. We state what we're after as the ideal. This is what we want to be, and we are being that. There are times to say we're not being that, and we try to get around to that as well. But what we really want to do is see ourselves as faithful Christians, servants of God. And so we call ourselves that. We know that from time to time we are not all that we ought to be. But in our effort to see ourselves and see the ideal and live up to it, we say we are faithful Christians. We are bound for heaven. We are determined to do God's will. That's who we choose to be. It's our intention for our lives, individually and collectively. It doesn't mean we always meet the standard. It means we are trying to live up to it. And that's where David is. He says, O Lord, verse 1, my heart is not proud. Now, a couple of things about that popped into my mind. It takes some self-examination to be able to say that. To be able to comment on our heart takes some self-examination. And sometimes when we examine self, we can do it honestly and sometimes not so much. And so this is one of those moments where in order to understand if we are proud or not proud in our hearts, we really have to be honest with ourselves. We can lie to ourselves, deceive ourselves, but it doesn't do any good. We're not accomplishing anything. God knows for sure, and oftentimes others perceive things about us that we don't know are perceptible about us. Have you ever noticed that? Has that ever dawned on you in life? You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes we know something about ourselves. We don't want others really to know about it. We act as if others don't know about it. And then we find out that what others perceive about us is true. And it's the thing we didn't want everybody to know. The truth of the matter is we kind of over a period of time get to know each other. And if we have a proud spirit, folks are going to know about it. If our heart is proud, people are going to, not just God, people are going to know. And so what that ought to call us to do is to be honest in our assessment of our hearts. But the second thing about that first statement there is it is a heart issue. Pride is a heart issue. Flip over to Proverbs 18 with me real quick. You can just turn over a few pages to Proverbs 18 in your Old Testament. Proverbs 18. Proverbs 18 and verse 12, please. Proverbs 18 and verse 12 says, "Before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, but humility goes before honor." The reason I want you to think about that is both passages speak about the heart. Pride is something that comes from within us. A proud spirit is something that comes from within. It is not something that happens to us externally. Let me say that another way. It is not possible for people to compliment you enough to make you proud in your heart. Now, they can create for you a difficulty that you have to manage, but an external force cannot make your heart do one thing or another. If it could, if over-complimenting someone could make their heart proud, it could force that to take place, then the opposite of that would be true, would it not? If you could manipulate the heart of others with your words, well, you'd have control of the whole world. You don't. You can't do that. And so it becomes a heart matter. That's the first thing I want us to think about when he says, "My heart is not proud." It's because he's chosen not to have a proud heart. That's why his heart isn't proud. That's why in his prayer to God, in his song to God, he says, "This is who I've chosen to be. This is the kind of person I want to be." Do you have any comment about that? Just that first line? Do you think it's possible to say to the Lord, for you to say to the Lord, "My heart is not proud"? Can we get to a point to where we can say that? That's a hard one. It's easier for us to make a list of the things that puff us up, because the other things we kind of push away. From within him, David says, "I'm controlling my heart so that it is not proud." Now the second line in verse 1 gets to how he treats other people. Nor my eyes haughty. The second line is, "I'm not proud in my heart and my eyes aren't haughty." Now what that gets to is how he perceives and sees other people. That one's a challenge for us also. It is so that from time to time it is easy for us to look down on others or look at others with disdain or see others as less than ourselves or not measuring up to the standard that we seem to meet constantly. You can also understand really quickly that being proud in heart and haughty as you deal with other people fit together. They go hand in hand. If the one is present, the other's apt to be there also. And so David is saying, not from a pride standpoint, "Look at me, I've got this under control." David is saying, this is the kind of person I'm trying to be. I'm trying to control my heart and my view of self in all of this. I'm trying to be humble in my heart. And the result of that then is that I don't walk around looking down at other people and looking at disdain with other people. Do you think our world has a problem with that today? We hear a bit about the cancel culture today. You've heard that phrase? Anybody heard that phrase? Yeah, I've heard that phrase. That whole premise begins from the standpoint of, I know more than you, I see more than you, I'm in a position to judge you. That's where everybody is today. The Christian is different. We are not to approach the world with haughty eyes, looking down at others. How about another proverb? Go to Proverbs 30. Turn over to Proverbs 30 with me, please. Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30. Begin with me in verse 10 of Proverbs 30, please. Verse 10 of Proverbs 30. "Do not slander a slave to his master, or he will curse you and you will be found guilty." Verse 11 says, "There is a kind of man who curses his father and does not bless his mother." Verse 12, "There is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed from his filthiness." Verse 13, "There is a kind, oh, how lofty are his eyes, and his eyelids are raised in arrogance." Verse 14, "There is a kind of man whose teeth are like swords, and his jaw teeth are like knives, to devour the afflicted from the earth and the needy from among men." Isn't it interesting where he says, there's a kind of person People can be characterized, if you will. And from wisdom's point of view, there is a kind in verse 13 who has lofty eyes. And he doesn't just say he has lofty eyes. He says, oh, how lofty are his eyes. He's saying there is a kind of person who, as he looks out at the world, sees everybody else as beneath him. Nobody lives up to him. Nobody is as good as he is. And then in the end of verse 13, he just says he's full of arrogance. That's what he is. It is the person who is always, in every case, right. It is the person that criticizes everybody else. No one can please this person because this person is the one who always is right. We've said before, it's the person who's the hero of every story the person tells. It is the person who looks at everybody else in derision. Back to our psalm, David says, I don't have haughty eyes. That's a big claim to make. But again, he's speaking of the ideal and what he is trying to accomplish. A New Testament reference we'll turn to really quickly, Romans chapter 12. Flip over there. You will remember Romans 12 and where we're going when we get there. Romans 12, real quick. Romans 12, real quick. He says in verse 14 of Romans 12, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. That is, put yourself on the same level and in their place. Be empathetic toward them. Verse 16, be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. The New Testament has somewhat to say about Christians being humble and treating each other respectfully and not being haughty. So Psalm 131, O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty. Then he launches off into this thing that's kind of strange for us. He says at the end of verse 1, nor do I involve myself in great matters or in things too difficult for me. That's an interesting thing for him to say. We tend to, if I can use the phrase, pride ourselves on knowing things. We want to be people who are informed. If there's something that others know that we don't know, we have this desire sometimes to know. And then if we do know something, we have a tremendous desire to tell you what we know. That's a challenge for us. Have you ever met somebody, and don't yell out any names, have you ever met somebody who just knows a lot about everything and needs you to know they know? The knowing isn't the problem, it's the needing everybody else to know that's the problem. We struggle with that. It's wrong, we struggle with it. Here David is coming from such a humble position that he says, I don't even involve myself in great matters or in things that are too difficult for me. First of all, he acknowledges that there are great matters and there are things that are too difficult for him, but he says, I'm not interested in those things. I'm not pursuing those things. Is he just content to be an idiot? Is that what he's saying? That is not what he's saying. It really is an attitude of utter humility. It is an attitude that says, that's not for me. I don't have to know all of that. I don't have to keep up with what everybody else knows and learns. Some people go to school and learn a lot of things that I'm just not really going to do really well at. There's some in here who've taken the advanced biologies and all those kinds of things, and that's awesome, and I appreciate that. I'm not for that. That's not my thing. That's okay. But really what he's getting at here is, from a humility standpoint, I'm not striving to be something I'm not. That's really what he's getting at. I'm not striving to involve myself in things that aren't my things. Now, we've looked a little bit at verse 1. Now, what I want you to do is hold your finger here and turn with me to Matthew 18. You probably know exactly where we're going in Matthew 18, but I want to do it at this point because I want you to see the mindset before we get into verse 2, the mindset that he is coming from. Matthew chapter 18 and verse 1, you'll remember what happens here. Verse 1, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and said, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Well, stop right there. Don't read any further. The answer, it would seem, from my standpoint, would be, well, the person who is closest to Jesus, number one, the person who understands what Jesus has been saying, number two, because we know all the disciples did not understand what he was saying. And so the person who has the greatest grasp on the message that Jesus is sending out, that's the one who's going to be first in the kingdom. We need the people, we need to round up the folks that really get it. They have listened well, they have understood well, they're smarter probably than the rest of us, and those are the ones that are going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Verse 2, and he called a child to him and set him before them and said, truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, if it stopped right there, you would think, I'm going to have to, I can put this together. I can understand what he's saying, but there's a few different directions we could go. He doesn't stop right there. He says in verse 4, whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Jesus gets to the children, and he says there is a certain childlike attribute, attitude, and character that my people need to have. Now, I want to stop right there. I want you to think about this. Whoever you are, however old you are, however many years you went to school or didn't go to school, I want you to think about this. What Jesus is after is people who are humble, people who have a childlike disposition toward Him and toward others. Matthew 18 makes that clear. That's what He is after. People who are humble. Go back and look at verse 1 now of Psalm 131. O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty, nor do I involve myself in great matters or in things too difficult for me. David says, I've gotten control of my heart. I'm minding my own business. I'm being what God wants me to be. That is humility. The greatest expression of humility for you and me, ultimately, is going to be how we submit ourselves to God and all of His things. His Word, His people, His institutions, His structure. The greatest test of humility is how we submit to God and God's things. And it is possible to submit to God and God's things with a haughty, arrogant, judgmental attitude. And David is saying that's not what we're doing. What I mean by that, it is possible for us to say, yeah, I'll become a Christian. I'll go to church. I don't understand why God says baptism is that big of a deal. What's getting wet? I mean, what does that have to do with anything? But I'll do that. I'll do it. And yeah, I'll come to the church building and I'll go through that process, but I don't like the decision the elders made about such and such, and I don't like this and I don't like that, and it seems to me that we would be better off if we do this. I'll do what you tell me to do, but it seems to me we could sure do better. David's not struggling with that because he has his heart under control. And that's really the test of humility for us. But then he goes in verse 2 a little step further, and he begins to talk about his soul being quieted like a weaned child. We don't talk about that very often in the assembly, but it's an awesome, awesome concept in verse 2. Surely I have composed and quieted my soul like a weaned child rests against his mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. He's talking about contentment. He's talking about peace, but he's talking about that not during the process of greatest comfort, not while the child is nursing, because that is the moment of greatest comfort. He's talking about after that moment, when the nursing has stopped and that time has come where, oh no, I don't like this. I liked it better the other way. What are we going to do? How's it going to work? And there's a point at which, after the weaning process, that the child is now content again, trusting that the child's mother's going to still be there and going to take care. And that's really what he's after. Think about it like this. Think about the children of Israel as they make their way from Egypt to the Promised Land. The Lord sends manna. They complain about the manna. They don't like the manna. The manna is not really what they want. They want something greater. But the manna taught them daily that God was going to provide for them. God was going to take care of them. They didn't always get that lesson. In fact, they'd missed that lesson a lot, kind of like we do too. But that manna was the nursing. That manna was, I'm going to provide for you every day. You don't have to do it. I'll do it, God said. I'll take care of it for you. And that was intended to build trust. That was intended for Israel to know God wasn't going anywhere. He was going to take care of them. And God did that for them to help them build trust in Him, because He knew when they get to the Promised Land, everything changes. Everything changes. They're going to have to deal with a lot more. And that's the weaning process, where the child has been nursed and the child has been content with that. The child looks to that. The child expects that. And all of a sudden, the child doesn't get that anymore. And there is this moment of, oh no. But then there is that trust. And David says, I have a composed and quieted soul. After I have been weaned, I am now trusting that I'm going to be okay. It speaks to his relationship with his God. It is a process for you and me to build that kind of trust and reliance on God. It's not something that's going to happen automatically. We're going to have to do that. But how we see ourselves, again, is really important. Back to where we started. Sometimes we state the ideal as if it is always what we reach and attain. It is not, but it is still the ideal. And being a contented, composed people, that's what we're after. The world is, in many ways, going crazy. But it has in every age. Every generation can look around and say, okay, at this point, everything was great. At this point, it was terrible. Every generation can do that, one way or another. We look at ours and say, yeah, well, it's terrible or it's even worse. It's just gone even crazier. Okay, fine. But like we say from time to time, God is still God. Christians are still Christians. Eternity is still eternity. We can build within us a quiet, composed spirit. Because God, who has taken care of us to this point, will take care of us from here on out. It's that Philippians 4:11 concept where Paul says, I have learned to be content. I've learned to be content. It's similar to what the Hebrew writer said about Jesus. He learned obedience through the things that he suffered. He's learned that. And I like the way David says it there in verse 2. Surely I have composed and quieted my soul. One other thing about that I'll point before we move on and wrap it up is that it was his responsibility to do that. David had to do that. It was his soul. It was his attitude, his disposition. It was his mind. David had to do that. Don't look to anybody else to do that for you. Nobody else can quiet and compose your spirit. Nobody else can settle you down. It was recently pointed out, and I thought really well done, that saying calm down to people rarely makes them calm down, right? It just doesn't solve the problem. But you can quiet and compose your spirit. And I would suggest you to be successful with that. You're going to have to go back to verse 1. You're going to have to go back to verse 1, and you're going to have to be humble, not look at others with haughty eyes. You're going to have to not worry about the things you can't fix. The matters that are too great for us aren't always education related. In fact, rarely are they. There are things we just can't solve, problems we can't deal with, things we can't come up with a solution for. That's okay. You can, in spite of those things, have a quiet and composed spirit. You can do that. Last thing, because we're out of time, last thing is hope in the Lord. He says that in verse 7 of the previous psalm as well. Hope in the Lord from this time and forevermore. Hope in the Lord. You don't ever give up. You know God's coming, Jesus is coming back. You know God's prepared a place for you. You know all of that. And your hope lies in that. Your hope does not lie in this world. I will remind you of it because we're going to talk about it briefly at our, mentioned it at our 1045 session. I'll remind you of the pyramid we had on the screen last week and the red line. There are things below the red line that never ever change. God and His things do not change. Life is above the red line and it is in a constant state of change. We hope in the Lord. That's things below the red line. We hope in the Lord because that hope doesn't change. By the way, that's how we then are able to quiet our spirit, because we approach this life with an attitude of humility. It's a neat little psalm. There's more we could say about it, but that'll do for now. Thanks for studying with us. We'll take a little break and then begin Bible class at 10 o'clock.